In the 1930s, Hitler's Nazi regime came to power in Germany. As the years passed, the military might of Germany shocked most of the people in Europe with technological marvels they'd never seen before. German troops were on the move almost daily, keeping tensions high as the whole of Europe watched on, helpless to stop Germany's military might. The British Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, made a last-ditch effort to slow down the Nazis' aggression while avoiding war when he met with Hitler in Munich on September 30th, 1938. But no one expected this to work. A war seemed inevitable, and with the Nazis' military power, no one knew what the outcome would be. The only thing they knew was it would be the worst war humankind had ever seen. The British government knew they'd need to take an innovative approach to winning this war. Little did they know that Britain's eventual victory could be attributed largely to one man, Alan Turing. I'm Dan Lefebvre, and this is based on a true story. The 2014's The Imitation Game tells the story of Alan Turing, who is played by Benedict Cumberbatch in the movie. Turing was born on June 23, 1912 in London, England, to an upper-middle-class family. He started school at the age of 6, and right away his teachers knew there was something different about him. As he grew, so did Turing's love for school. In 1926, Turing's first day of school at Sherborne in Dorset happened to coincide with the 1926 general strike, an event where over 1.7 million workers went on strike. So determined not to miss his first day of school, Turing rode his bicycle from his home in Southampton over 60 miles by himself just to make sure that he'd get to school on time. At only 15 years old, Turing found the work of Albert Einstein, and for the first time, he was able to do what nobody else could. He could develop Einstein's work, which essentially come to conclusions from Einstein's work that Einstein never made clear in the work itself, so thoroughly understanding it only at the age of 15. Despite his brilliant mind, many of Turing's professors didn't like how utterly focused Turing was at math and science. In Andrew Hodges' book entitled Alan Turing, The Enigma, he quotes one of the letters that Turing's teachers sent to his parents. And I quote, "I hope he will not fall between two stools. If he is to stay at public school, he must aim at becoming educated. If he is to be solely a scientific specialist, he is wasting his time at a public school." End quote. While in school in Sherborne, which is on the southern coast of England, Turing drew a ton of inspiration from many of the greatest mathematicians of the time, names like Sir Arthur Eddington, John von Neumann, Max Newman, and Bertrand Russell. At Sherborne, Turing became close friends with a boy by the name of Christopher Morcom. The two struck up quite a friendship, and many historians today refer to Morcom as Turing's first love. The two decided to apply to King's College together. Unfortunately, Morcom contracted tuberculosis in February of 1930 after drinking some infected cow's milk. He died suddenly, leaving Turing stricken with grief. In The Imitation Game, Benedict Cumberbatch plays Turing as a very shy, socially awkward person, and this is actually quite true. Although he is impressing everyone around him with his brilliance, Turing didn't have many friends. So when Morcom died, and without anyone to really console him, Turing threw himself into the only thing he could, his studies. And that's when, in 1931, Turing learned of the decision problem by German mathematician David Hilbert. The problem essentially was that mathematics of the day were prone to paradoxes and inconsistencies. So Hilbert proposed a solution to this, securing a foundation for all mathematics. Now, later the same year, another German mathematician by the name of Kurt Gödel published a paper which proved two key things for any computable axiomatic system that's powerful enough to describe arithmetic. First, if the system is consistent, it can't be complete. And secondly, the consistency of any reasoning can't be proven in the system. These fascinated Turing. Now, by the age of 23, Turing excelled so much in his studies, he was given the highest award that can be given to an individual at King's College, the Fellowship of King's College, also referred to as being a fellow. Between being named a fellow at King's College and before his next step, Turing spent almost a year on Hilbert's decision problem. His solution was something that would change modern computing forever: the Turing machine. The Turing machine was more of a theoretical machine in that it was never really intended to be built. However, the importance of it lay in the fact that it could be implemented. Otherwise, it would just be science fiction. Essentially, a Turing machine has tables of programmed behavior that's complex enough to read the tables of other Turing machines. Then, the first Turing machine would be able to do what another machine could do. Now, it seems like a bit of an abstract concept, but it's an important one because it's essentially the same concept that's the backbone of today's computers. So if you think of the Turing machine that's sort of like a computer program, you'd need a computer to run it on. And this is what Turing called a universal machine. So the correlation between these two is like the correlation between today's computer hardware and the software that runs on it. Let's say you have Microsoft Word on your computer. You want to be able to edit a photo, but Word can't really do that. However, what you can do is install Photoshop to edit your photo, and then put that photo into Word. All of this is happening on a single device, your computer. And Word and Photoshop have to work together enough that it takes the photo once you've edited it in Photoshop and bring it into Word. So while all of this seems simple in today's computing world, you have to remember that in 1936, computers like we have today simply didn't exist. And although it garnered the name machine, you can think of Turing more like the modern-day software program. And then the universal machine could run an infinite number of subset machines that could essentially talk to each other to accomplish whatever you need. The universal machine, or your computer, can have multiple subsets of machines or the software installed to do whatever you want. So in this way, Turing concluded that if anything is computable, it could be computed by one machine, a universal Turing machine. He presented his work to Max Newman in April 1936, and this opened up a whole new world of thought. As it happened, a mathematician at Princeton named Alonzo Church had been working on similar solutions, and so it was that after graduating from King's College with a special distinction, Turing left England for the United States, where he attended Princeton University to study mathematics further under Church. Just to add some context to this, Turing started studying at Princeton in September of 1936. In June of 1938, he got a PhD from Princeton with a dissertation entitled Systems of Logic Based on Ordinals, where he introduced the concept of ordinal logic and the idea of relative computing. He earned this in less than 2 years. Now, after graduating from Princeton, he returned to England, where he was almost immediately recruited by the Government Codes and Ciphers School. On September 9th, 1939, England declared war on Germany. The very next day, Turing had arrived at a place called Bletchley Park to start working on his machine for a new purpose, as a device for decrypting the messages sent by Germans using their Enigma machines. In The Imitation Game, Benedict Cumberbatch's version of Turing names his machine Christopher after his first love. In reality, this didn't actually happen. The machine was called Bomb E. It was later renamed Victory, or at least the very first machine was, but it was called Bomb E because it was based on an earlier decryption device that the Polish had built called the Bomba Kryptologiczna. Now, that's Polish for essentially cryptologic bomb, and they were actually successful somewhat in cracking the Enigma cipher with these Bomb E's. The Polish, certainly knowing that their time was limited, sent as much as they could to help British intelligence. This included the framework for their own Bomb E machines and even some Enigma machines that they had captured. And these were critical to helping Turing and his team. Then in 1939, Germany invaded Poland, and from here it would seem British intelligence was on its own. Why is the German Enigma so important to break? Well, the movie actually did a pretty good job of explaining the importance, but let's break it down. As the Nazis started to expand their empire across Europe, one of the keys they knew was being able to keep their plans away from the enemy. To do this, their scientists built an incredible piece of technology. The German Enigma machines were used to create a cipher or code that could only be read by another Enigma machine using a special decryption key, and that key was changed frequently. Think of it sort of like having two-factor authentication today. With today's two-factor authentication, you have your normal username and password for a website that you log into, and then it'll ask you for a unique code. That code is generated with a second device, usually your smartphone, and this code changes, usually every 30 seconds. The end result is basically that you need to have your phone handy to be able to log in. This makes it next to impossible for someone to get into your account without your phone or without your secondary device. While the technology behind today's two-factor authentication is of course much more complex than that, and the Enigma machine obviously didn't run on a cell phone, the basic concept is similar. Having access to an Enigma machine itself isn't any good if you don't know the decryption code, just like knowing somebody's username and password to a website doesn't do any good if you don't have the secondary device for that unique code. Now, the Germans randomly changed the code, so to break the Enigma code, you would need the machine, of course, but you'd also need to know what that random code is. Simply put, it was next to impossible to hack an Enigma machine. And the Nazis knew this. Because they knew this, they used the Enigma to transmit all sorts of top-secret information. Now, on the flip side, if the British intelligence could crack Enigma, all of a sudden, every German surprise attack on land and sea, not to mention countless other surprises that the Germans threw at the Allies, would no longer be secret. In 1938, as the Nazis were just starting their bloody trail across Europe, British intelligence set up Bletchley Park and gathered all of the brightest minds with the sole purpose of decrypting German ciphers, most predominantly the Enigma cipher. Bletchley Park is located in southeastern Germany, and they actually have a working version of the bomb there today, so if you get a chance to visit, I'd highly recommend it. In the Imitation Game, they emphasized the tension between Turing and his military supervisors as England's position in the war grew increasingly dire, and Turing's machine had yet to break the Enigma code. While the basics of this are correct, in truth, the Enigma had to be broken more than once. This was because the German Army and Air Force used a different Enigma system than the Navy. In fact, the Polish's Bomb-E made significant headway in breaking the Enigma ciphers for the German Army and Air Force. Turing and his team may have based their work on the Polish Bomb-E, but they made significant improvements to it, and on March 18, 1940, the first Bomb-E was installed at Bletchley Park. To give a sense of scale for these machines, each Bomb-E was about 7 feet wide, 6.5 feet tall, 2 feet deep, and weighed 1 ton. Now, there were two primary things that the British Bomb-E needed to be successful in breaking an Enigma encrypted message. First, they needed to know the Enigma hardware itself, because the Germans did change the hardware itself throughout the war. So capturing the Enigma hardware became a priority for the Allies and has actually spawned movies of its own, such as the movie U-571. The other thing that they needed for the Bomb-E to be successful was to be able to guess at least 20 letters from the text. And that's where in the movie they were able to break the code because of guessing words like Heil Hitler and weather were in the encryption. While not always from weather reports, the Germans' use of Heil Hitler in their communications did actually make for this to be a common method of breaking the code. Unlike in the movie, though, where they make it seem like Turing himself built the machine, the first Bomb-E was actually built by the British Tabulating Machine Company at Letchworth, about 30 miles away from Bletchley Park. Another differentiator from the movie in real life came when in the movie Turing went directly to Winston Churchill for funding his first Bomb-E machine. That's not actually what happened, although the cost of £100,000 mentioned in the movie was correct. That's about $6.5 million in today's United States dollars. Now, Turing did reach out to Churchill, we'll talk about that here in a little bit, but it wasn't for funding the first machine. Now, despite the success of breaking the ciphers using the expensive but effective Bomb-E machines, there's simply too much for their limited team to handle. Imagine, if you will, that you have a single computer trying to monitor the traffic of an entire world war. Even with the computing power of a modern-day system, that would be quite a difficult task. Not only that, but even though Turing's team was able to crack the German code, it wasn't like they knew which communications were which before decrypting them. So one message might be something as simple as the weather, another might be something actually important. There's no way to really tell before it's decrypted, at which point you've already spent the time to decrypt it. So it's completely understandable when Turing and his team started to get frustrated. They felt like their work just wasn't enough. Despite this feeling, they were making quite a huge difference and had significantly decreased the amount of losses the English were suffering. On August 8, 1940, a second bombing was installed, but it still wasn't enough to turn the tide of the war. Growing increasingly fed up with the lack of responses as he was trying to get more people on his team and more funding for more bombies to help decrypt everything that was coming through, that's when Turing wrote a letter directly to Churchill. Andrew Hodges' biography of Turing has the text of the memo that came from Churchill. It was written to General Hastings Ismay, who was Churchill's chief military assistant. And it reads, I quote, "Action this day. Make sure they have all they want on extreme priority and report to me that this has been done." End quote. Churchill's response, although short, was like magic. All of a sudden, Turing had whatever he needed. By the end of the war, there were over 200 bombies in operation. With very accurate results, the British bombies were able to break the encryption for the Army and Air Force Enigma machines because they only used 3 rotors to generate that code. The German Navy, however, had more rotors on their Enigma machine, so this made it a lot more difficult. Throughout the war, Germany kept changing their Enigma machines too, which is another reason why the Allies had to keep capturing updated Enigma hardware. But the Navy's rotors started with twice as many in the Army and Air Force at 6. Then it was updated to 7, and finally by the end of the war there were 8 rotors, each time increasing the number of possibilities that they had to break. At the end of 1939, Turing had solved the additional complexity for the Navy's Enigma, at least in theory. Taking this theory to practice, however, would prove to be a little bit more difficult. So to test his theories, Turing invented a new method of ruling out certain sequences of the Enigma rotors. This significantly decreased how long it took for them to test the bombing machine's settings, and by extension got them up and running much faster. In the Imitation Game, playing the role of Joan Clarke is Keira Knightley. Now in the movie, Clarke worked in Hut 3 along with the other women, but in truth, Clarke worked in Hut 8 alongside Turing. The two formed a great friendship, just as they did in the movie, and in the movie, Knightley's character complains that her parents are pressuring her to get married. Since homosexuality for men, but not women, was illegal at the time, the arrangement in the movie makes sense. While there's no proof of this being the rationale, we do know that Clarke introduced Turing to her family shortly after Turing proposed to her in 1941. The engagement was short-lived, though, when Turing admitted his homosexuality to Clarke, and while Clarke didn't really seem to care, she's being reported as, quote, unfazed, unquote, by it. It was ultimately Turing who decided to break off the engagement. After years of working on breaking the German Navy's more complex Enigma, essentially taking his theory and turning it into practice, Turing finally broke it in 1942. Although the British had been in the war for years now, they had a new ally across the ocean in the United States who joined the war after Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. As part of intelligence sharing between England and their new allies, Turing traveled to the United States where he helped the U.S. Navy build American bombies. While in the U.S., he visited Washington as well as the U.S. Navy's lab in Dayton, Ohio. Although he wasn't too fond of the way the Americans were building their bombies, saying they relied too much on machinery instead of thought. He shared what he knew about the German Enigma machines with the Americans to help them out, and in exchange he was given access to the encryption system being set up for private conversations between Churchill and Roosevelt. He was essentially Churchill's verification that the system would in fact be secure. Turing returned to Bletchley Park in 1943, where he continued with decryption efforts, and on September 2, 1945, the Japanese signed an unconditional surrender, ending World War II. Just like in the Imitation Game, keeping the work at Bletchley Park secret was of utmost importance. Because of this, it wasn't until a British Royal Air Force officer by the name of F.W. Winterbotham published his book, The Ultra Secret, that the public really started to understand the work that went on at Bletchley Park. And although he couldn't use or even talk about the work he'd done at Bletchley Park, after the war, Turing left the British intelligence and went to work at the National Physical Laboratory, or NPL, in London, where he started working on a machine that rivaled everything he built so far. In 1946 at NPL, Alan Turing finished a proposal for an electronic digital stored program computing device called the Automatic Computing Engine, or ACE. While great in theory, NPL was skeptical that it could work and, quite simply, didn't have the resources to build the machine even if it did. Because of the secrecy at Bletchley Park, Turing couldn't explain it. He knew the machine would work because he had built things similarly that had worked with the bomb E's. So the machine would stay a theory until a pilot version was built by NPL well after he left in 1950. Perhaps one of the most popular reasons why someone would recognize the name of Turing comes from something that happened in 1949 when Turing was the deputy director of the computer lab at Manchester University. He was working on artificial intelligence and proposed an experiment that would later become known as the Turing test. Even now, the Turing test is given to determine whether or not an artificial intelligence is indistinguishable from a human. As part of the test, Turing built a chess program for a computer that didn't even exist yet. In 1952, and without a computer powerful enough to actually run the test, Turing played a game of chess with his colleague where Turing simulated the role of the computer, following the rules of the program. His program ended up going about 50-50 when he lost to his colleague, Alec Glennie, but then won the game against his former colleague's wife. Throughout the entire movie, The Imitation Game is a plot threaded in which someone breaks into Turing's home and steals nothing. And then the detective, played by Rory Kinnear in the movie, is trying to get to the bottom of it. Although the detective Kinnear plays is purely fictional, the basis for these events happened when Turing met Arnold Murray. Murray was a 19-year-old unemployed man at the time and met Turing outside the cinema just before Christmas at the end of 1951. The two saw each other periodically until, on January 23, 1952, Turing's house was broken into. Now, Murray admitted the burglar was an accomplice of his to Turing, and Turing then reported the break-in to the police. During the ensuing investigation, Turing admitted a sexual relationship with Murray, something that was illegal at the time. Both Murray and Turing were charged with gross indecency. At the initial proceedings, which were held about a month later, Turing took the advice of his brother and legal counsel and pled guilty. And so it was that on March 31st, 1952, Turing went to trial and was convicted. Now, he was given a choice between two things. Either he could go to prison or he could go on probation, on the condition that he undergo a treatment intended to cure him of his homosexuality. Not wanting to go to prison, Turing accepted probation and treatment, saying, quote, "No doubt I shall emerge from it all a different man, but quite who, I've not found out," end quote. For the next year, he was injected with DES, a treatment that not only caused Turing to be impotent, but also caused gynecomastia. As a result of the trial and conviction, Turing was stripped of his security clearance and barred from any cryptographic consulting. He was allowed to keep his academic job, but the United States denied him entry in 1952 when he tried to go there because of his conviction. Just 2 years after his trial, on June 8, 1954, Turing's housekeeper arrived early in the morning to his home to find his body. Turing had committed suicide the previous day, killing himself with cyanide. A half-eaten apple was found by his bed, and many assumed that this was the method used to kill himself. 4 days later, on June 12th, Turing followed in his father's footsteps when his body was cremated and his ashes were scattered at the Woking Crematorium. 4 years after Turing's death, building on the pilot ACE that they had constructed from Turing's designs in 1950, the full-scale automatic computing engine that Turing had drawn up at the National Physical Laboratory was built in 1958, ushering in a new age of digital computing. Following Turing's sad ending, a lot of theories popped up surrounding his death. Some guessed that because of Turing's involvement with cryptography and because of the growing tensions around the world following World War II, that he was assassinated. There's never been anything to prove this, though. Some think that his death was accidental, the most compelling of these being a theory that Turing accidentally inhaled cyanide from a gold electroplating apparatus, which uses potassium cyanide to dissolve the gold, and he did have one of these apparatuses in his room. But then again, this was never proven either. Now, it is worth noting that the half-eaten apple beside his bed wasn't really anything unique, as Turing would often eat an apple before bed, sometimes not making it through the whole apple before dozing off. For a while, some even speculated that the company Apple's logo with a bite taken out of it was in honor of Alan Turing, although this was repeatedly denied by Steve Jobs. Another theory posed by some of Turing's biographers is that Turing was reenacting a scene from his favorite Disney movie, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Turing in particular enjoyed the scene where the Wicked Queen used an apple laced with poison, so it's interesting that he was to die in a similar fashion. No matter the actual cause, no one can deny that a grave atrocity led to the downfall of the man who Winston Churchill credited as having made the single biggest contribution to Allied victory in the war against Nazi Germany. Alan Turing was literally tried and convicted for his homosexuality, something that almost undoubtedly had a significant effect on, if not being the sole cause for, his death. Fast forward to August of 2009, and it was an internet petition that received more than 30,000 signatures that put pressure on the British government, and finally Prime Minister Gordon Brown released a statement. A portion of the official statement is as follows, quote, "Thousands of people have come together to demand justice for Alan Turing and recognition of the appalling way he was treated. While Turing was dealt with under the law of the time and we can't put the clock back, his treatment was, of course, utterly unfair, and I am pleased to have the chance to say how deeply sorry I and we all are for what happened to him. So, on behalf of the British government and all those who live freely thanks to Alan's work, I am very proud to say, we're sorry. You deserved so much better." End quote. On December 24th, 2013, Queen Elizabeth II officially signed a pardon for Turing's conviction of gross indecency, effective immediately. It was only the fourth royal pardon since the conclusion of World War II. This episode of Based on a True Story was written and produced by me, Dan Lefebvre. If you want to learn more about the life of Alan Turing, Andrew Hodges' biography entitled Alan Turing, The Enigma not only was the inspiration behind the Imitation Game movie, but offers some great insights into the genius mathematician. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Based on a True Story podcast. Based on a True Story is on the web at basedonatruestorypodcast.com, and you can find me on Twitter at Dan Lefebvre, DANLEFEB. Drop by, say hi, and let me know what you think.